Hey, welcome to Skeptic Hangout, the place where we sit back, relax, and chit chat about intriguing and sometimes controversial topics through the lens of skepticism. We are Josh, Richard, and Laura, and we have back with us today our guest host, Dr. Richard Firth-Godbehere, author of A Human History of Emotion. Today, we are going to be discussing disgust. Discussing, whatever. Go grab your English tea or your hot mate and join us as we discuss the gross, the bad, and the ugly. This is Skeptic Hangout. Disgust. All right. What have we got to say about disgust?
I'll let everyone else go first because, there's a joke I tell that in my field, when everyone thinks of disgust, they think of me.
Is it because you're disgusting or because you discuss disgust or because disgust is your thing?
I hadn't thought of that. I feel really bad now. That's what it is.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news.
Oh, yeah. I thought that was self-deprecation right there. So I was like, yeah, that's fine. I do self-deprecation all the time.
Yeah.
It's because I'm confident enough because I'm amazing that I can do self-deprecation.
I sometimes need to self-deprecate just so I can keep myself humble. I'll be like, oh my God, I suck so bad. And people are like, don't say that about yourself. I'm like, oh no, I need to. This is a necessary part of the balancing act.
And just for the record, when I think of disgust, I think of Josh.
Okay, wow. I was doing self-deprecation. That was just mean. But talking about disgust, I have a pretty high bar. I've kind of desensitized myself to most disgusting things. I think there's a couple triggers for me that I can get though, and it's a pretty common one that's been said online. It's the bunches of holes. I can't remember what it's called, like tryptophobia or something like that.
Yeah, that's it.
That's like one of the very few things that can disgust me. I don't like seeing like beehives or stuff like that. That's why the Candyman movies, despite me loving the first and the fourth one, have moments where actually do bother me because you see like the holes on the skin like all lumped together, and like that can do it for me. I can see people get their heads decapitated. I've seen people have trigger warning, their dicks ripped off, but that have been perfectly in movies.
I just want to throw it out there. That trigger warning was way too quick.
Trigger warning, dick ripped off. I've seen all that. I've been perfectly fine, but just like the holes mashed together on people's hands or body or is anywhere leaves me feelings of disgust. Everything else, though, for the most part, I'm pretty good. I'm really hard to get with any kind of feeling of disgust.
But disgust doesn't have to just be in response to visual stimuli, right? So you've seen a lot of horror movies and a lot of gross stuff and you're kind of desensitized to it. And I'm somewhere in the middle where I can handle quite a bit, but overly gory and it kind of gets to me. But man, disgust for me, for example, has way more to do with things like taste or smells, right? So I'm the person who, if I can't remember how old the thing is in the refrigerator, even if it's only 3 days old, I will throw it away because I'd rather accidentally throw away good food than accidentally eat bad food. Because I have that disgust factor where if I put something kind of sour or kind of rotten or kind of off in my mouth, I instantly feel overwhelming disgust, right? And maybe I just haven't done it often enough to get desensitized to it. But that to me, disgust goes way beyond just what we see. It could be any number of experiences or even just a thought, wow, the thought of X happening absolutely disgusts me, right? Like Trump having sex. Oh, right. So I don't know. What do you guys think about disgust, the Richards?
I think we've just lost half of our audience.
They're all in the bathroom vomiting right now.
They haven't. The thing about disgust, right? I study disgust. It's what I do. Historically, modern disgust. That's my field. That's my bread and butter, rotting bread and butter. That's what that is. Yeah. Nobody's left. In fact, everyone's leaning in because the weird thing about disgust is we love it. We love toilet humor. We love gore. We love it's somehow it pulls us in as much as it pushes us away. It's a very strange relationship we have with the revolting. Yeah, food disgust. Disgust is believed to be, I'll get the science out. I'll do the science bit, then we can talk about yucky things. But science, it is believed to be at its most basic, at its most primal, what's known as a pathogen avoidance system.
Ooh.
So we reject that which can make us ill. So things that taste bad, we've developed bad taste because things that taste bad can kill us, and smell can kill us. We look at a rotten apple, we know it's a rotten apple, we know not to eat it. It can kill us. We don't like the pathogens. And the further theory is that when people behave in a way that society deems incorrect, we see them as a pathogen, as something that is a societal pathogen. So we see that behavior as disgusting as well. And that is the cultural bit of disgust. It can change from culture to culture, but underneath we still have the feeling. So that's, and there's lots of brain chemicals involved that we're not entirely sure how they work. We know that the amygdala is involved. We know that the weird drop in things like oxytocin will drop and serotonin will go. And it's very complicated in the brain, but outside the brain, it's just that. Try not to die. That's why I feel disgust.
But
I like how
you did bring up like we do love disgust though, and there's proof in some of the videos that go viral online. I'm going to go to a classic that I think everybody's aware of, which was Two Girls, One Cup. Everybody I knew was disgusted by that. I thought it was fake, honestly, but everybody I knew was disgusted by that. But everybody I knew saw that video because the disgust factor, everybody wanted to share it with other people. And there's some curiosity about that kind of thing. Like you mentioned Trump having sex. I'm almost positive that if there was a video online, it would get to everybody.
Would watch it.
Oh yeah.
Just
to see if there was a mushroom involved.
So it's interesting because you brought up two different types of disgust, and that's really, really cool because you have the kind that is just naturally occurring because your body is revolted by the idea of something that can make it sick. But then you also have culturally taught disgust. And that to me is really, really captivating because we really take for granted how programmed we are. And I think it's really cool, but it's also kind of heartbreaking to think that like, hey, some of what I was taught in terms of disgust is really quite arbitrary. It's just my culture values this over that. And so my culture is teaching me that that is disgusting and I've come to believe it. The problem is I don't think enough people take the time, and this is me being a little bit like cynical here, but people don't really take the time to challenge where those cultural beliefs come from and be like, do I really need to be like my friend was talking the other day about sex between siblings. And his thing was like, yeah, it sounds icky to us. And he's like, but if they're not having children that could have genetic problems, and if they're not hurting anybody, and if they're consenting adults, like, who am I to tell a brother and a sister that they can't have sex? Like, my advice then would be don't have children, right? And he's like, I don't get why people make it so taboo. And that's interesting to me because that even icked me out. The conversation we had about it made me feel uncomfortable and icky. And I had to admit, I was like, oh yeah, no, I'm icked out by that because I've been taught since my earliest ages that is absolutely wrong, like wrong, bad.
And I kind of know where Richard might answer this because I've spoken to him on this before, and I've heard him speak in person on his book tour about this. But if it's a case of it's both a cultural thing and kind of ingrained in us, is it nature or nurture?
You know what my answer is, don't you?
Are you going to say
my
both?
answer is yes.
Oh, that makes me happy.
Yeah, it's a bit of both. Even food. 1/3 of the world's population eat insects as a source of protein every day, and the other 2/3 go there.
Yeah,
I'm not going to be the grasshopper. Turns out they're really nice.
I've actually had a grasshopper. They're not
I eat insects all the time. I've got a cupboard full of actually in there of flavored insects right now. Some barbecue ones that are amazing.
Ooh, I believe it.
Yeah, they're a great source of protein, very low in fat, full of vitamins and vitamin B and stuff. They're fantastic, and they're very good for the environment. We should actually be eating insects. They take a fraction of the resources of, say, cow meat. So they are a fantastic source of protein. But we've been raised, and it's not just insects. If you've eaten anything Scandinavian in your life, well done. You're very brave. I once got close to some. I got about a foot away from it. I went, oh dear God, no. And that's about it. Was some fish that had been buried underground for 400 years or something weird like that. It was quite scary. And there's cheese in Spain full of maggots, live maggots that they think is if it's called a delicacy, it usually means that everyone else thinks it's horrible. That's kind of the rule.
Yeah.
China, where they like their snakes
and toads.
Snake's
and
not so
toads,
bad. The eggs,
preferably
with
alive.
the fetuses, is a little bit gross to me.
Yeah, and live mice as well. It's quite a delicacy in some parts of China and things like that. So food is a cultural thing as well. It's this pathogen thing is not as deeply built into us as possible. There are even, there are even some tribes in Papua New Guinea, cannibalistic tribes that are on record as taking the intestines to their chief so that he can heat, let's just say, the warm end part of the intestines with certain substance in it that you wouldn't think anybody would eat. This is where I do lose the audience for that talk about people eating shit, but some
of us just have a shit-eating grin hearing that.
Exactly. But so yeah, it is powerfully cultural, but at the same time, yuck is a universal thing. You'll find it everywhere and when you look at the historical record, there'll be versions of it. And my favorite one, since this is the kind of podcast we are, is that sin, and most people don't realize this, is the things that disgust God. That's what sin is. If you look at them all, the original Hebrew, they're all different forms of things that make God go, ugh, that's horrible. They're either idolatry, which he thinks is a moral yuck, or they're food, which is usually the foreigners' food, like pigs and shellfish. We don't eat that foreign mucky. Oh, that's kind of stuff. And then there's sort of just behavioral things like gambling and cheating, which is again moral disgust. So disgust has always been with us, and it shaped some religions that apparently you Americans may have heard of.
Once or
here and
twice.
there.
Yeah.
Your politics.
Yeah.
You get involved now and again.
Right. Yeah. We have a hard time separating our religion and our politics. We like to mush all of our social structures together until they're like inseparable. But no, it's interesting you said that, because I remember having a conversation about that on one of our live shows, and I wish I could remember which one of the ones that we did for the ACA, where that's exactly what we were talking about, is the idea that sin isn't what's morally bad or morally wrong in terms of harm or a bad that it causes because of the outcome. It's morally bad because it hurts or offends God, right? And there's nothing more arbitrary than just some dude not liking this thing or that, right? And we can all agree, like, so God thinks murder is abhorrent. It's one of the 10 commandments, right? So we can agree to some of them. Some of them are really arbitrary, like shellfish, right? Or baby goats in their mother's milk, right? Like, I mean, I wouldn't want to do that either. I'm a little bit disgusted by it, but who am I to make it sinful for somebody else to do it?
Yeah, just to interject, God thinks murder is abhorrent unless he's doing it or commanding it to be done.
Because it doesn't offend him when he wants a person dead.
Absolutely fine.
Yeah, it's fine as long as he's killing his own kid. Yeah,
it's basically like God's okay sending the dick pic, but he doesn't want the dick pic sent back to him. So it's kind of that kind of scenario. If we're gonna put it in a metaphor, if we're gonna put it in one sentence,
so off topic.
I'm trying to put it in a metaphor that our listeners will understand. Speaking of God, though, like probably one of the most abhorrent things that God believers will take is they'll say like homosexuality is disgusting or something like that, and that's something like that's definitely culturally, religiously impacted in people, because I've been an atheist my whole life and never really had a problem with gay people because it wasn't something that was put into me as something that's gross. But I've worked with a woman who, like, she took her iPhone to me and it had 2 gay guys on it kissing. He's like, isn't that disgusting? Like, no, that's 2 guys that like each other, at least sexually. So that's perfectly fine with me. It doesn't make a difference. I don't want in on it. I'm not gonna tap the shoulder and try to get in, but it's perfectly fine for other people to do what makes them happy.
That's interesting, because I was raised non-religious, but both my parents had come from very religious households. So even though they had kind of like denounced their religion, and my dad has since returned to his, but we were raised non-religious, but with a lot of those religious ideas like just shoved down into us, but through kind of a secular lens. And so I remember that. I remember being very uncomfortable and disgusted watching certain things like even just public displays of affection between straight couples, but definitely seeing any sort of affection with gay couples made me incredibly uncomfortable and disgusted, like you said. And I remember
Mm.
as a young adult starting to challenge some of those beliefs and ideas and kind of starting to come into my own. I remember like actually sort of forcing myself to be okay with looking at pictures of two guys or two girls kissing because I was like, I didn't understand that there was anything wrong with it, and I didn't understand why I felt so much disgust. And when Richard talked earlier about like the cultural programming that can go into our perceptions of what is disgusting,
Mm.
I didn't think about that at the time. All I thought of was like, I'm disgusted by it. I know I shouldn't be, so I'm gonna force myself to become desensitized because
Yeah.
I don't want to be that dick that like has a problem with something so
Yeah.
arbitrary.
The interesting thing is the this sort of revulsion towards homosexuals is getting over it is kind of recent. You can see it in scientific literature. There is something called the Disgust scale, and what it is, it's a series of questions. You ask these questions, and people who are very sensitive to physical disgust often tend to be quite politically extreme. There's a purity thing going on. They originally thought it was just right wing, then they went to a left wing college, and the same thing happened. People who are very left are sort of more physically disgusted by things than people who are centre. But in the 80s, the disgust scale had the question in it: you sit next to somebody and you discover that they are gay, because it was taken as granted that people go, oh, I'm disgusted by that, who are very sensitive to it. It's
Wow.
not even in there. It's been taken out because, it's
Well, we've
it
just
doesn't
come a
happen.
long
Well, in
way.
the
Yeah,
80s also
yeah.
it was completely different because there was the whole AIDS HIV scare.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
wasn't just religion that was putting in the disgust into people. It was like poorly put out their facts about how AIDS was spread, and it was like told as a gay disease. So then that might have tipped the scale in disgust back in the 80s, where if you go back into Roman times, everybody
Oh,
was
wow.
doing everybody, and that wouldn't
And it
even
was all
register
good.
on the disgust scale.
They had a totally different attitude to gender and sex and everything. So, it was all about giving and taking. It was who was giving and who was taking, and it was not really about what you were
gender.
giving it to and taking it with. For lack
It
of a better
very
phrase.
much shows disgust is largely societal. I don't know if everything is, like you said, the pathogen things, like we'll
Yeah.
probably have most people will probably have a problem with like the old food, although I've taken a lot of risks with old food, but it's because I've never had food poisoning before. So I'm feeling adventurous about going into the food that might have been out there a little bit longer than it should have been. I've also had a gas station sushi and been just fine. So like I'm willing to test the boundaries, while other people will see gas station sushi and they'll be disgusted by the idea of eating it. I don't have the revulsion because I've never felt the sickness involved in old food or bad food. So it's perfectly fine for me to go and take those risks. So past experiences like getting horrible food poisoning probably adds into disgust because you're going to flash back to those horrible moments. I have some liquors that I don't drink anymore because it just the idea of drinking them makes me want to throw up from my days when I was getting blackout drunk every single weekend. So like it's definitely some of it's learned through over indulgence, I guess.
Yeah, they say that, well, it looks like a lot of disgust can be create, I think the phrase they use is instant heuristics. So rules of thumb in the brain that you go like that. And sometimes you'll have something, it'll make you violently ill, and your brain will go, never again. Because your brain thinks when you're disgusted, your brain's trying to stop you from dying. That's what it's doing. So it doesn't do it by half. It just gets in there most of the time. Nope, never again. Do not have that sushi.
No, that's really, really interesting. And that kind of shows how, because I know that Jill Ever talks a lot about like his favorite thing to say is our brains are shit, right? And no
Oh, yeah.
doubt, like they're very faulty little computers. And so we think that there's like this perfect process that's going on that like our brain discovers X and it's correct, therefore X in the future and it's always right. And that's not true at all. And I love that you just said that because I had a lot of aversions to certain foods after I was pregnant with my first child because I threw up a lot. Like I was sick the entire pregnancy and it was a horrible experience. And I remember I knew by the end of the pregnancy, I knew all my favorite foods to throw up and I ate them the most often because if I did get sick and threw it up, I could handle it. And I'll tell here's for the audience, cream of wheat tastes exactly the same coming up as it does going down. right? But it was terrible. So I didn't like, to this day, I don't care for iceberg lettuce. And I used to have no problem with it. I used to eat it in my salad, on my burgers. And like to this day, it has a bitter, nasty taste. Well, that bitter, nasty taste is probably like my memory of stomach acid or something. I don't know. But it's interesting that you bring that up because
Yeah.
I wasn't sick and there was nothing wrong with the food, but my brain did make a very, very heavy connection.
Yeah. At the same time, in reverse, you can desensitize to disgusting things, thankfully. It's one of those things that a lot of the satanic panic brigade, I hate you putting brigade on the end of things, but it works here. They'll say that, oh, these people are desensitized to computer games, that's why they're going and shooting everybody. And that's so desensitization has a bad rap, but you know, every surgeon in the world is desensitized to your innards. If they couldn't do any surgery. And every treatment for phobias, you know, if you've got certain kind of phobias, it's usually desensitizing you to the thing that is causing you phobia. Because a lot of phobias are based on disgust as much as they are fear, like spiders and that kind of thing. So yeah, disgust is interesting that you can get it very quickly and you can lose it slowly, but you can lose it. You can lose it again. So what you need to do is start with a little bit of lettuce,
Yeah.
and then a little bit more. And
There
then
you
before
go.
you know it,
Mix
6
it in
months
with
down
my
the line,
salad.
big salad.
There
Yeah,
you
you know.
go. Yeah.
I mean, all you have to do is
Eating
go
iceberg
through like
lettuces.
all you have to
Yeah.
do is go to a fast food place, and almost every single time they'll have more lettuce than your burger. And
Right.
you'll be
And you
over
know
it
what
in
I
like
do?
a few
I pick it
days.
off. Like my salads are mixed greens or spinach or like green leaf. Yeah, it's so funny. Like but you're right. Like just adding a little bit of it in here and there, maybe that would be not a bad plan.
I did not think doing an episode on Disgust we'd start talking about lettuce. We've literally gone from people eating shit to lettuce in one episode.
And
That's a
Laura would
weird
obviously
kebab, man.
Laura would prefer to eat the shit than the lettuce, is
I
what we're
certainly
finding
would
out here.
not. No. Actually, give me the iceberg at that point. I will stomach it if I have to.
I mean, we're not going to force you to eat. We're not going to give you a plate of shit and lettuce and make you choose on this podcast. We're not doing that till
Right.
the 100th episode.
Josh might make me eat cilantro because that's the kind of person he is,
Oh.
but not iceberg.
There's a disgust that doesn't make is weird for people because that's like you have a gene for that disgust. So that's another place that disgust could come from, because cilantro to me, just I could shovel that in my mouth with just like some onions, maybe for just a little bit of extra flavor, and I would be good. Laura feels like she's drinking Dawn soap, is what she's told me.
It's like a mix between soap and like, I don't know, like orange juice. Like it goes up into your nasal passages and it makes me want to vomit. Yeah, it's really bad.
Yeah,
See,
the other one is Brussels sprouts. Sprouts, a lot of people hate them, just
So
hate
good.
them.
I love
But the chemical they have in them, I can't remember what it's called now. I should know it, but I can never remember it. But there's a chemical in them that some people are genetically disposed to find really bitter, and some people aren't. They've actually bred it out of them now, so everybody should actually like sprouts, and they don't know it because they won't go near them, because when they were kids they were revolting. But yeah, they've bred the chemical out.
That's funny because I love Brussels sprouts, but I didn't start eating them until I was an adult.
Yeah,
but like,
I probably didn't have my first Brussels sprout until like 3 years ago. I'm like, Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes was having problems with these. These are delicious.
yeah, my kids love them. Yeah, so that's interesting when we talk about genes, because I have the whatever for cilantro, and I'd love to hear if you know anything about that, Richard, and like expanding on that. But I also find things bitter that people don't find bitter, like melons. Like I hate any kind of melon. It doesn't even taste sweet or yummy to me. It just has a really nasty, sharp, bitter taste. And people are like, no, it's like sweet, it's mellow, it's delicious, it's refreshing. And yeah, I don't know where they're getting that idea.
That's a new one.
It's I found the name of the chemical that's in these things that some people are very sensitive to. Now, bear with me. Phenylthiocarbamide. It's a chemical similar. It's one of that family, and some people are really sensitive to it. And you do find it in melon. You find it in lots of other things as well. And some of us don't have the gene and don't taste it at all. So that'd be why.
So Josh, you don't have that gene. Congratulations.
No. That's a new one for me, because I've heard of cilantro.
Congratulations for being born.
Right.
I thought I did a pretty good job at it. Like I've been celebrating it for 35 years because I did such a spectacular job of being born. But that's a new one. I didn't know about the melon one. Is it like all melons, or is it just
all
like
melons?
watermelon?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because I know people that can't take the texture, like the texture of the melons will gross them out. Like my brother doesn't eat watermelon because the texture of the watermelon grosses him out. And there's like some people are the same way with like coconut. Texture overrides flavor for them, and that's where their
Huh.
disgust comes from. So I'm
Yeah.
just trying to dive into all the areas where people find disgust. I'm not disgusted by it too much. So like most of this is like, this is all good stuff for me, except for the shit eating, which I haven't tried honestly. So maybe I'm missing out. Maybe I had that gene that makes shit taste like ice cream. I don't know.
I think that's one of those things where if you go your entire life not exploring, I think you'd be okay.
Yeah, you'd be fine.
I don't know. I feel like I'm missing out.
You know, talking about
Cacophagy.
different kinds of disgust, and I'm not sure if I've heard you speak about this before, Richard. Is there kind of different mechanisms for different kinds of disgust, or does it all come from the same place?
Well, that's where the debate is. We know that the insula is activated in a very similar way, whether it's moral disgust or physical disgust. They seem to share an activation, but of course we can't. The brain is looking at the brain is more difficult than most neuroscientists will admit. So we can't see much, and we think the insula actually controls levels of emotional valence of sort of strength, if you like, how good or bad you feel something and how strong you feel it. So it might not be specific, but there seems to be some kind of brain similarity with both forms of disgust. However, at the same time, disgust as we understand it in English in the West, because languages have different words for this and different understandings, it's kind of, it dates back to about 1720, 1730, when a bunch of taste theorists who were into their aesthetics, as they'd later be known, which, by the way, were the same as morals, because if something was physically beautiful, it was also morally good. They use the same language for both. They wanted an opposite of beautiful, sort of the most perfect taste, the most tasteful. And they found this word that someone had nicked 100 years ago from Italian. A guy called Florian nicked it, put it in English, disgust, which just meant taste bad. And they started to use it for morally bad and physically bad. And that's kind of where we got it from. This modern notion of disgust as that, which is the opposite of nice, if you like, of tasty. And so there is some kind of brain mechanism, but of course, emotions aren't a brain circuit, despite what people used to think. Emotions use all your brain. So when you find something disgusting, you don't necessarily just go yuck. Your brain remembers the thing last time you had it. It taps into your memories. You might be brought up, like you say, to dislike it or not, if it's an insect or if it's whatever. You may have got a gene that's involved. There may be some, basically your whole brain goes, right, what's going on? Something's wrong. What, or right, what is it? That's that thing. That's disgust. Happens in a flash, and you go, yeah. Or ew, because the word changes over time. And yeah, it's so the answer to that question is possibly. It's just, as I've said many times, studying the brain involves taking some emotions in the brain, and I've done this, involves taking somebody, getting them to put a gown on, getting them to lie on the back, getting them to have their head strapped still so it doesn't move, sticking them in a massive tube that makes a huge amount of noise and saying, we're going to show you some pictures. Now, feel as you normally would. Okay.
There's nothing problematic about that at all.
No. So there's some really good science being done now in virtual reality with different technologies to monitor the brain. So it's getting better because that's more realistic. They can still control it, but you feel more like you're in a real world, a little. But yeah, it's so there's probably a link between moral and physical disgust in the brain chemistry, but what it is, we don't really know. There's a classic paper from 1998 that a lot of people quote. The paper's called Disgust, and that says
Clever title.
categorically that the brain flashes the same bits in both moral and physical disgust, but it's from 1998 and things have moved on somewhat since then. But it's one of those bits of science that lingers. Last episode talks about bad science. That gets in that category, science that lingers and people won't let go of, even if it's been debunked 1,000 times. That's one of those.
Yeah, brain science is interesting anyway, because it's especially imaging. Brain imaging is relatively new. It's only been happening for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
It's very, very, very new. And it's constantly being refined. And you're like, I have conversations with people now, and they'll talk about, oh yeah, but this shows up in brain scans and stuff. And they're talking about stuff from 1995. When it was barely like 5-6 years old since the first brain scans were being done.
Yeah, back when they did the brain scan of a dead fish to show how badly it can be manipulated.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So disgust almost seems like an overworked mechanism to the point where it can be completely used to manipulate people into bad ideas and stuff like that. Like, it almost seems like it's too overactive, and like people that know about it know how to use it in order to like militarize people into their viewpoint. And you can indoctrinate somebody with disgust with little bits of knowledge of it. It seems like it's an old trait that we've gotten through evolution that it serves some purpose, but it's way too damn active in us today, to the point where it can make us very stupid.
Yeah, well, and we don't like feeling it, right? So if you can program someone to feel disgust towards something, they're going to have an aversion to it. Like when you said that, the first thing I thought of was like the abortion argument. Like the language used is murdering babies, right? We all feel disgust over the idea of murdering a baby. So you start to use language like that, and then you get people who don't know the science or haven't really thought about it. And you can easily, even once you present them with good data, they will still be disgusted by the idea, because that is not something that goes away. Like I still struggle having a very, very racist father, and the way he would make me feel disgust towards any race other than my own. I still get uncomfortable with people in public, even knowing that I shouldn't feel that discomfort. And I just try my hardest to not let it show. But it doesn't go away automatically. Like even knowing that the kinds of things he taught me are not true. The feelings of fear or disgust are still there. So I think you bring up a very, very poignant point. Like how much of our politics and our idea of what laws should be on the table are a direct result of that kind of emotional manipulation, where you make something icky. Like who cares about right or wrong? Just make it feel icky. Like what you said with the gay men kissing, right? Like that to me is insane.
Well, there's like people like Matt Walsh, who I'm going to say I'm disgusted by that guy, who is pushing like transphobic propaganda all based around his disgust. There's nothing based on the actual science. Because if you look at the actual science with trans people, it very much verifies their identity, but they're not interested in the science. They're interested in trans people make them feel icky. So they're going to try to make them look like the villains for their personal feelings, when like people like Matt Walsh should look inside and like try to see, why does this make me feel icky, instead of like demonizing the people that are just trying to live their own damn lives.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most famous examples of this in history, apologies to Godwin, but is the film The Eternal Jew, which was a Nazi propaganda film, which basically likened Jewish people to rats. So they are rats, and they are a vermin, and they are disgusting. They need eradicating. And that, powerful stuff, and led to very bad things. It can be used, disgust can be used. Witchcraft, the witch trials are very much based on a type of religious disgust called abomination, which is the sinful thing. And that's the idea that a witch, as well as lots of politics and top down, so there's all sorts of factors that cause a witch crazy, but also they were objects, the women were seen as objects of revulsion, of disgust. Witches were depicted as being older and less firm than people might like, because judging women by their bodies isn't a new idea, unfortunately. So, and if they were younger witches and how they behaved wrong. And again, disgust had played a huge role in that. So it can be a very, very dangerous thing. And we see it in politics all the time. Immigrants, in the UK, the current government is basically vilifying and forming this disgust rhetoric around people who are so desperate to get somewhere safe that they'll risk a dinghy across the English Channel.
Right.
Apparently, these people are revolting in some way. They've been described as an infestation and that kind of language, and it's just can be dangerous. Disgust politically.
It's really effective for garnering public support. Like if a government wants the people to not push back against something they're trying to do, get them disgusted. And it doesn't matter what the science is, doesn't matter what the truth is. It's almost like that takes front seat.
I mean, that's what the whole groomer thing is about right now, where the right is accusing anybody that they deem disgusting as groomers, despite the fact that there's no evidence that like drag queen shows are anything sexual or grooming, or like again, trans and gay people. They seem to be the biggest target of the right wing's disgust right now, and so they're trying to like weaponize other people's disgust, and they're like saying any of these people are pedophiles, which I think I'm not 100% on this, but I think this is similar to how the Nazis used disgust and like weaponizing it against people, is trying to make them seem like them living their own lives is somehow abhorrent or unsafe for children because of they're going to do disgusting things for them, when it's based on zero facts. Zero statistics are showing that that this is happening. You might find like a pedophile trans person, but they're not like setting the trend.
And it's not because they're trans, right? The two are not connected in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. It used to be gay people. It used to be gay men specifically, in fact. That they were always paedophiles. They shouldn't be allowed near children. They shouldn't. And you still get that attitude now from certain types. And it's weaponizing disgust, and it can be weaponized. It often is weaponized. And the trick is to try and spot it, to try and spot when they are trying to make you feel about something rather than necessarily think about it too hard.
It's difficult for people when they don't have the skepticism to look at it, and they're just getting hit with it over and over and over again. Like they have Fox News on at my gym, so when I'm at the elliptical, I can see Tucker Carlson saying horrible things the entire hour that I'm on the elliptical, and like, this is bad. And then people that don't know how to like look at this and try to parse out what's fact and what's just wrong propaganda, it gets fed you over and over again. You're going to start believing
it. You bring something up that makes me think of disgust in the reverse, right? So you're saying that, like, okay, so Fox News, for example, is making people feel disgust on all these topics, and so these people aren't really looking into it, they're not researching it, they're just kind of taking it at face value and how they feel about it. What's interesting is, as you're talking, I'm feeling disgust, right? And so when I see Fox News, I get angry, I get disgusted. And that is also a learned reaction. And what that does is it shuts down my skeptic to where I'm going to automatically reject a lot of what they say just because it came from Fox News. And now if I hear it somewhere else too, I am more likely than not to give it more credence. But if you know what I'm saying, like I automatically have that feeling of disgust to where when really conservative Republican Christian nationalist type people start spouting something, I am more likely to be automatically disgusted with that idea. And that's wrong, right? Because what they could be saying something like, cars emit X amount of whatever, right? And they could be spot on, and I'm going to automatically reject it until I hear it somewhere else because of that disgust. So it's interesting that you say that, because it works both ways.
I think I actually experienced exactly that about a year ago, might be more, when Boris Johnson made a speech, and all the way through the speech I'm thinking, shut up. And then he talks about, because the one positive of that man, he's quite a green. He actually buys into it completely, and he started talking about replacing our electrical infrastructure with more renewables and some nuclear power stations. And the was going, oh, hang on, actually, no, that's a good point.
Like, wait a second.
I feel dirty. And I immediately felt dirty because I was agreeing with Boris Johnson. Like, horrid.
You gotta go take a shower afterwards.
Yeah. But it's It can blind you, but also I mean, there are certain emotions that we like to call the gatekeeper emotions, the moral gatekeepers. That's one of them. Shame is another. And, there's several ones out there. But disgust is a particularly powerful one. That's why I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by it because it's a gatekeeper, because it can cause so much harm, because it can make us laugh as well, and has been able to for as long as we've got records. One of the earliest records of the Arabs during the Crusades is a guy running across to a sultan and saying the Crusaders are attacking, the Crusader farting and saying that's about as much use as the thing you just told me. So fart jokes go back a long, 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 long way. And Gargantua and Pantagruel that goes on about how a swan's neck is the best thing to wipe your ass with. So it's a weird emotion. It's a very strange feeling.
That's the side that I thought we were going to be going into more when we talked about this topic, because I think late 90s, early 2000s, gross out humor was the big style of humor at the time.
Yeah.
And I still laugh at that kind of stuff to a degree. There's some other things in those comedies that are a little haven't aged well, but like a fart joke gets me to laugh all the time. Like I remember the first time I saw Nutty Professor in theaters with my grandma, they had the fart scene at the table and I was laughing for like 20 minutes. The scene had ended like 10 minutes ago and I was still laughing as a little kid in the theater. So like, yeah, there's something disgusting about farts, but they're still very funny to us. I find people in person, vomit makes me want to throw up. It disgusts me. Seeing other people get vomited on or just vomiting on the screen makes me laugh every single time. And I'm not sure how that works, because in person, disgusting makes me dry heave. On the screen, seeing it happen, something disgusting like that happening makes me laugh. I'm not sure why our emotions work like that.
Emotions are about context. As simple as that.
I was gonna say maybe we could have Richard end on that one since it's coming up to the end of the show, but that was a little bit too brief. So yeah, what are your guys' final thoughts on Disgust? And Jilliver, since you haven't spoken in a while, I'm gonna pass it off to you first.
I've learned a lot from over the last few months from speaking to Richard and reading his book, which I'm going to advertise.
And
right
I will
now.
put a link in the show notes for those of you who are
And
interested.
that's the American cover.
That's the one
So I
look for.
have learned. There's an audiobook version as well, and foreign language versions if you want to read a foreign language.
22 languages.
Wow.
Yeah, I've learned a lot about emotion. I was already really interested in kind of brain science and emotion and things, and myself and Richard have spoke before about different scientists in that kind of field. So I've already had an interest, but I genuinely have learned a lot about disgust from reading Richard's work, and I don't know if that's a compliment or not.
There's no good way to say something nice about that book.
Well, the book's not all about disgust. I talk about love, and I talk about fear, and I talk about shame, and I talk about lots of other things. But there is a big chunk of disgust in there.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, and the different context, the different cultural contexts, is something that's well worth a little bit of reading up on, and I just find it fascinating. I just think we as people having brains that are essentially shit but brilliant at the same time is fantastic. It's amazing that we go through life thinking, for example, things like memory, like video, we kind of perceive them as video recordings.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we talk about them, but that's not actually how it works at all. And you know, there's so much to be said from kind of digging beyond the surface. So you know, I think everyone should go out and learn a little bit more about disgust.
I love it. I learned a lot this episode about my own concepts of disgust, like just the different various stories I've told about like my past and how I'm programmed. I'd never really thought of those things. And I never really thought about even like the cilantro thing. I never thought about it as disgust, but really that's what it is, right? So it's interesting the different ways in which it manifests in our lives. And like I really learned a lot about myself in this particular episode, and I really appreciate that. Josh, what are your closing thoughts?
I really learned a lot about Laura in this episode, so I'm pretty happy about that.
I think you all did.
Honestly, I thought this was going to be a more jokey episode. I expected to be putting out a lot more fart humor. I tried. There wasn't really any humor. It was just like talking about enjoying farts. This went a little deeper than I expected. It was a good talk. Disgust permeates our entire existence. It seems it can make up a lot of who we are, just in trying to avoid disgust. So it was a good talk.
All right, so I
find it interesting that we're disappointed. Someone's disappointed that we had a deep and
we are capable of that.
Rather than talking about farts.
I'm shallow.
Well, I know we got to close up here shortly, so I want to give our guest Richard the final thought before we close out the show.
Oh, I've got many thoughts, but basically, never underestimate the power of disgust. It is an extraordinarily potent emotion, and just check yourself when you feel it, because sometimes it's the right thing to feel, but quite often somebody's making you feel it for a reason, and because it's an easy way to get you to do things. So yeah, be aware of your disgusting feelings.
All right, so thank you guys all for joining us today. Don't forget to head over to our Facebook discussion group and put in your 2 cents about disgust. What disgusts you? What different things do you feel disgusted by that maybe you shouldn't? Maybe you should think twice about where that disgust comes from. And give us your thoughts, and yeah, check out the book, because that's fascinating to me. We'll definitely put a link of it on the show notes, and we'll put a link on the Facebook post as well that has our episode. So give it a look, and until next time, keep questioning. Nope,
interrogate your beliefs.
Stay skeptical.